Welcome to Experience Talks, the radio magazine for the experienced listener. I'm Cynthia Friedlob. Today's guest is stage and screen star George Takei, who is here to talk about the Los Angeles premiere of the Broadway musical Allegiance. This powerful play was inspired by his own family's harrowing experiences during World War II, when 120,000 Japanese Americans were forced to abandon their homes and all of their possessions and were incarcerated in camps simply because they were of Japanese descent. In the musical, Mr. Takei plays the pivotal roles that he originated on Broadway. You can see this uplifting testament to the power of the human spirit at the Aratani Theater in Little Tokyo through April 1st. Go to experiencetalks.org for details. Now, here's George Takei with host John Semper Jr. for part one of this conversation.
George Takei, welcome to Experience Talks.
Thank you very much. It's great talking with you.
It's a real pleasure having you here. Let's talk about the inception of Allegiance. I thought it was very interesting that in your publicity materials, there was a little face mask of you. And I thought to myself, well, this is kind of unusual. But then the more I thought about it, I realized that in a way one gets to see the world through your eyes by wearing the mask, and very much gets to see an experience through your eyes by having seen this musical, this play, this wonderful play. So how did this all begin for you? What was the inception point?
Well, your commentary on the mask is eminently apt because I'm an actor, and theater has a tradition of using masks. In Native American culture, it was also a religious thing. One with the nature, and they painted their faces. And in Japanese theater, not kabuki, well, kabuki paint their faces as well, but even preceding kabuki, they had no theater, NOH theater, where they wanted to control the emotion. And so they had elegant masks, finely crafted. In African theater, or tribal rituals, they had masks, but movement was a part of the mask, and so dance was included, and the movement of the mask was played an important part. And so, as an actor, it's eminently appropriate. You can also say that we play other characters, and in that sense, we mask who we are in order to play a villain or a saint, it's a actor's mask.
Yes.
So your use of the mask to begin our discussion is eminently appropriate.
Well, and it really gets into something that I did want to talk about, which was your experience with theater. Now, that ties in a bit with your experience in the camps. You were occasionally shown, you and your family were shown old Japanese movies.
Not just Japanese movies, Hollywood movies as well.
Hollywood movies as well.
I remember seeing The Hunchback of Notre Dame, or George Raft as a gangster. So we saw both. But the Japanese movies we saw, more often than not, were missing the soundtrack.
Yes.
And so together with the film, there was a man in another block in the internment camp that traveled with that film from block to block. These films were shown in mess halls after dinner when the tables were cleared away and just the benches were lined up. Mm-hmm. And the people of that block all gathered, and we saw these movies. And these Japanese movies had a narrator, actor narrator, come with it. And he had some sound tools, and he had a young man with him who helped him with the sound tools. And in the sword fight sequences, he clash cymbals, and a boy may have had clackers that he clacked to add to the rhythm of the sword fight sequences. But the man also had memorized the lines of each of the characters, and so he became the lord of the realm, the shogun, and he took on his voice and his demeanor. And the samurai that he was talking to would say, "Hai, kashikomarimashita." And the princess would say, "Ma, osoroshii koto." I mean, all those vocal changes coming from one man was absolutely fascinating to me. And so I was watching him as much as I was watching the images on the sheet that was hung up there. And that magical quality that a human being can produce was what in some ways inspired me.
And he was referred to as a benshi.
Benshi, yes, that's correct.
Yeah, it's amazing. So this was your first inspiration. Now let's talk about the inception of this play and why you decided to do it as a play and really specifically as a musical. I find that fascinating that this very personal story of yours should end up being turned into a musical.
Well, I'm an actor, a theater person, and so I've always had in mind storytelling, and one of my missions in life has been to raise the awareness of that chapter of American history, because particularly east of the Rockies, when I'm talking to people that I consider well-informed, well-read people, and I tell them about my childhood imprisonment, they're aghast that such a thing happened in the United States. They don't know that chapter of American history. So it's been my mission in life to raise that awareness. I've gone on nationwide speaking tours. We founded the Japanese American National Museum here in Los Angeles. And so as an actor, I've always had the idea of dramatizing that story, to humanize that story. We were in New York, my husband and I, Brad, and when we're in New York, we go to the theater almost every night to take advantage of our limited time there. And one night we went to an off-Broadway theater, and we were waiting for the show to begin. There were 2 empty seats in front of us, and 2 guys came down the aisle and sat there. One was an Asian American, the other was a white guy. And the Asian American guy recognized my voice. Brad and I were talking, and he turned around and he said, "You're George Takei, aren't you?" And from that began a conversation. And then during intermission, we chatted some more. And Brad and I went back to our apartment saying, "Those 2 guys are really passionate theater lovers, fascinating people." And the next night, we went to see Lin-Manuel Miranda's musical. No, not Hamilton. This was before then. It was I think about 2008 or 9, and it was In the Heights, the story about the Puerto Rican community.
Of course.
And there's a father-daughter relationship there, and near the end of the first act, or the first act, just before the intermission, the father sings a song called Inutil, useless, because his daughter wants to go to college, and he desperately wants to provide that education for her, that opportunity for her, and he can't. And he he sings about the anguish he feels in not being able to give her that opportunity to really fully participate in society. And that reminded me of my teenage after-dinner discussions with my father. We talked about many things about the internment. I had read civics books and was absolutely inspired by the ideals of our American democracy, and I couldn't reconcile that with what I knew to be my childhood imprisonment. And I couldn't find anything in history books, so my father was the only person with whom I could get some information on that. And we had many, many conversations. And one night he was telling me about the anguish he felt having a 5-year-old kid, me, a 4-year-old kid, my brother, and an infant daughter, thinking about his 3 children behind barbed wire and what's going to happen to them. What kind of future are they going to have? And he said he was tortured by being behind those barbed wire fences with those 3 children. And that song by the father in the Heights and his torture reminded me of my father's discussion. And I'm known as a weeper in the theater. And I started to not just weep, but gush. And then, of course, the intermission comes and the lights go blazing on. Oh, I should preface that by saying when we walked into the theater to see In the Heights, in the same row this time, not in front of us, but in the middle of the very same row, were 2 arms waving at us, and it was those 2 guys.
Wow.
And since the seats were occupied, we just waved back at them. And right after the gushing and the intermission, the 2 of them came clambering over knees, smiling and to chat with us again. And they saw me wiping the tear off my face. The Asian guy was Jay Kuo, and the white guy was Lorenzo Tione, an Italian, an immigrant from Italy, who came here came to the United States, to Austin, Texas, the University of Texas, as a student, and he became an American. And they asked me why that song affected me so emotionally, and I told them about my father's discussion as a teenager, and about our imprisonment during the Second World War. And they became very fascinated by that. And they went back to San Francisco. We came back to Los Angeles, but I maintained an email relationship with Jay. And he told me that he is a composer-lyricist.
Yes. And
he'd written many musicals that were produced in San Francisco. He saw this as a wonderful musical. And I said, musical? I was planning on developing that as a drama. And he said, but music hits the heart so much more profoundly.
Wow.
It moves people as drama cannot, or in a different way. It humanizes. And being a musical theater fan myself, I knew what he meant. And so I was a chairman of the board of the Japanese American National Museum at that time, and I told him, you can have the chairman be your docent and come down and let me take you through the Japanese American National Museum. And promptly, Jay and Lorenzo came down, and I took them through the museum. We had dinner together, and we discussed the internment even more. And we came up with the idea of developing Allegiance as a musical, and my family's experience being fictionalized and dramatized as Allegiance, which I am currently performing in right here in my hometown in Los Angeles at the Aratani Theater at the Japanese American Cultural and Community Center.
Now, I was going to ask you about that. Your experience in theater began in Los Angeles, because I know you went to UCLA and studied drama. And for you, this has got to feel like a homecoming. I know that Allegiance started in San Diego.
Right.
But for you to be now in Little Tokyo, performing down to where your family relocated after your experience in the camps, how does that feel to be reliving their experience in that particular location?
Personally, it's enormously fulfilling because I consider Allegiance as my tribute to my parents, my father and my mother. But also, Los Angeles has the largest concentration of Japanese Americans, and the story of the internment touches the largest number of people here in Los Angeles.
Yes.
And for me, the story of the internment begins here in Little Tokyo. Mm-hmm. We were in a 2-bedroom home in East Los Angeles, Boyle Heights, on Garnet Street. We were taken from there and brought downtown to the Buddhist temple, where people, all the Japanese Americans that were rounded up, were brought. And it was from there that we were put on buses and taken to Santa Anita racetrack and herded over to the stable area and assigned a horse stable that was still pungent with the stench of horse manure. For me, as a 5-year-old kid, I thought it was fun to sleep where the horses sleep. But can you imagine for my parents to be taken from a 2-bedroom home at gunpoint with their children and forced to sleep in a narrow horse stall? It was all cots. There was no space we clambered over cots to get to the farther cots. It was a humiliating, excruciatingly painful experience for my parents. I mean, and that was to be followed by more outrages. But it was from Little Tokyo that we were taken to Santa Anita. That was called an assembly center, a temporary housing, while the camps were being built. And we were there for about 3 months and then transported by train with armed guards at both ends of each car, 2/3 of the way across the country, to a camp in the swamps of Arkansas, Rohr. Rohr was the farthest east of all the 10 camps. There was another one in Arkansas called Jerome. There were 2 camps in the blistering hot desert of Arizona. Can you imagine? And others in places like Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, all in desolate, hellish places. And 2 in California, one in the Owens Valley and the other right near the Oregon border in the northern part of this state. And so the story began for our family here in Los Angeles and in Little Tokyo. And Little Tokyo is kind of a bracket because when my father was a block manager in both camps we were in Arkansas and in Tule Lake in Northern California. And so when we were released, people came to my father for what he did in camp, for advice and assistance in whatever situation that they were in. And the thing that they needed were jobs and housing. And so my father opened an employment agency, an office, right at in Little Tokyo. There's that retail area called Japanese Village on First Street between San Pedro and Central Avenue. And my father's office was right there as you enter Japanese Village on the left-hand side where there's a restaurant called Omasa. That's where my father's office was. And now today, his grandson, Scott Rowe, has his business on the 2nd Street side across the street, a shared office. What do you call those? Where people, entrepreneurial types gather.
I understand what you're talking about, yes. A
workspace.
So
my father's office and my nephew's office.
It's wonderful.
Bracketing Japanese Village. And so for Allegiance to be playing in Little Tokyo seems like an aesthetic thing.
Completion, a full cycle.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it must make you extremely proud to have it be such a success. and to be coming here as the success that it is. I mean, you've already played Broadway and done extraordinarily well.
And played at the Old Globe Theater in San Diego, a very respected regional theater.
Absolutely.
And we broke all attendance records at the Old Globe. We didn't quite do that on Broadway, but here we are in Los Angeles, and I'm here to spread the word so we can break the Aratani Theater's attendance record.
Now, I've got to take a quick look at my notes. In April 2018, the Aratani Theater celebrates its 35th anniversary as the largest Asian Pacific American performing arts venue in the country. You're now performing Allegiance there. Do you feel a different kind of response from predominantly Asian audiences than, say, the audiences reacting on Broadway, or is it essentially the same?
We've humanized that story. People identify with the characters that they see on stage, whether they're African American, white, Latino. There's that connection. And people come backstage to tell us the same kind of things that they share with us in New York. Although I must say in New York, where there's a large Jewish population, they saw their own families experience in the European concentration camps, the Nazi concentration camps. I tell them that ours were not extermination camps, as it was with the Nazis. But, you know, we sometimes kind of think about if the war had been going poorly for the United States, what could have happened to us, all concentrated behind barbed wire in desolate camps.
Did you ever imagine when you were creating this play that it would hit with such a resonance and arrive in an era when there's talk of building walls and keeping people out and keeping people from traveling here? I mean, it has become, unfortunately, so topical.
Timely.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about that?
The relevance is chilling. When we were developing it, you know, the racism existed,
sure,
but it was not as chillingly real as it is today. It was another executive order last year signed by Donald Trump that used the same kind of broad brush. We were characterized as potential spies, saboteurs, you know, and that same broad brush said all Muslims are potential terrorists. Or the nominating conventions contest was going on, and characterizing immigrants coming from the south of the border as rapists and murderers. Right. Same broad brush. There are Arab American dentists that I go to, but long history of their Americans, but he was chilled by that executive order. But I told him, there is a difference. We have progressed because 75 years ago, I mean, I'm talking about last year, 75 years ago from last year, there wasn't a single elected official that spoke up for us. Only one, the governor of Colorado, Ralph Carr. But every elected official from coast to coast were advocating our imprisonment. And we had an attorney general in California who was a ringleader of the advocacy of imprisoning us, because that attorney general was ambitious. He wanted to run for governor, and he saw that the single most popular issue in California was the lock up the Japs issue. That man's name was Earl Warren. A name that still resonates in history, as in a different context. But he, in order to get the popularity to run for governor, became an outspoken advocate of locking up the Japanese Americans. And he made an astonishing statement. He said, there have been no reports of spying or sabotage or fifth column activities by Japanese Americans. And that is ominous, because the Japanese are inscrutable. That old racial stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what they're thinking, so it would be prudent to lock them up before they do anything. For this Attorney General, the absence of evidence was the evidence. And he became very popular, and he indeed was elected governor and re-elected twice, and went on to be appointed the liberal Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. And he never owned up to that while he was living. But he had written a memoir, which he ordered to be published after his passing. And in it, he says, the greatest regret I have in my political life was the role that he played in the internment of Japanese Americans. But he couldn't make that statement while he was alive. He was peppered with challenges from the Japanese American community to talk about that past, and he was absolutely silent on it. In death, he owned up to it.
We'd like to close part 1 of this interview with a song from Allegiance entitled, What Makes a Man? Please join us next week for part 2. Experience Talks is produced by John Semper Jr. and me, Cynthia Friedlob, for Engage, the nonprofit that is creating community for all ages. Learn more about any of our guests and listen to previous shows on our website at experiencetalks.org. Thank you for joining us.
What makes a man is his clarity when he listens to his heart. What makes a man is his bravery when he plays a bigger part. What makes a man is what he makes of himself when he's doing the best he can. I must be my own man. It's time we took action and found a way out of this place. I'll set an example, help others to see beyond race. And though my face resembles our enemies in war, I am still American, nothing less and nothing more. I'll never be a scholar, much as Pop wants me to be, and I'm not some nameless body in a crowd. If Pop would only see the soldier I could be, I'll finally find a way to make him proud. I'll finally find a way to make me proud. What makes a man is his dignity when he stands for what is right. What makes a man is his loyalty when he fights his nation's fight. What makes a man is what he makes of himself when he's giving it all he